"Get this pauper away from the table," my daughter-in-law said, her voice sharp and loud enough for everyone in the dining room to hear. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The silence that followed carried them further than any shout ever could. Two men in black suits, security I hadn't even noticed before, stepped closer to me. Not aggressively. Not rudely. Just professionally. As if I were a problem to be handled quietly. I looked around the table. Crystal glasses. Fine china. A centerpiece of white lilies I used to arrange myself every Sunday for family dinners. The same table where my husband and I had hosted birthdays, Thanksgiving feasts, and quiet Sunday meals for over 30 years. Now, I was the only thing out of place. My son didn't look at me. Wade sat there, his fingers wrapped around his wine glass, eyes fixed somewhere near the tablecloth, as if the pattern had suddenly become fascinating. The same boy who used to run to me after school, who once cried when I left him at kindergarten, now couldn't even meet my gaze. I waited. Not for an apology. Just something. A glance. A hesitation. A sign that this wasn't real. Nothing came. I said, "Remove her," Romy added, her tone colder now, impatient. "She's making the guests uncomfortable." Guests. I followed her gaze and noticed them then, her friends, colleagues, people I barely knew. They watched me with polite discomfort, the kind reserved for strangers causing a scene. No one spoke. No one intervened. To them, I wasn't family. I was exactly what she had called me. A pauper. I placed my napkin neatly beside my untouched plate. My hands were steady, though I could feel something deep inside my chest tightening, like a knot being pulled slowly, deliberately. "I can walk on my own," I said quietly. The security men stepped back immediately. Grateful, perhaps, that I had made their job easier. I stood up. The chair didn't scrape loudly. I made sure of that. After all these years, I knew how to leave a table without disturbing others. Even when I was the one being removed. I glanced at Wade one last time. He still didn't look up. That was when I understood. Not just what was happening, but how long it had been happening. I walked out of the dining room without another word. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and if you can, tell me where you're listening from. I'd like to know how far this story travels, because for a long time, I thought it was happening only to me." The dining room felt different that night. Not because of the guests. Not because of the expensive decorations Romy had insisted on. But because of what was missing. Respect. It had been exactly 10 days since we buried my husband. 10 days since I stood beside his grave, holding a single white rose, trying to understand how a life of 32 years could end in one quiet afternoon. The house still smelled faintly of his cologne. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand. I hadn't moved them. I couldn't. At 71, I thought I understood loss. I was wrong. Because losing him was only the beginning. "Pass the wine," Romy had said earlier that evening, not even looking at me. No, please. No acknowledgement. Just an expectation. I reached for the bottle anyway. Old habits don't disappear overnight. For decades, I had been the one who made sure everyone was comfortable. Everyone was cared for. Everyone was included. Except, apparently, me. Wade had barely spoken during dinner. When he did, it was to respond to Romy or entertain their guests. His voice was light, almost cheerful, as if this were any other evening. As if I weren't sitting right across from him. As if I hadn't raised him. I studied his face when he laughed at something one of the guests said. There was a time when I could read every emotion in that face. Every worry. Every joy. Now, it felt like looking at a stranger who happened to share my son's features. "The house feels big without Dad, doesn't it?" I had said softly at one point, trying to bridge the silence between us. Wade didn't answer. Romy did. Well, "That's actually something we've been meaning to talk to you about," she said, placing her fork down with deliberate precision. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. I should have recognized it then. That careful politeness. That rehearsed calm. It wasn't concern. It was preparation. I didn't know it yet, sitting there at that table, but the dinner wasn't meant to include me. It was meant to remove me. The front door closed behind me. With a soft click. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. I stood on the porch for a moment, my hand still resting on the handle, as if I had simply stepped out for fresh air and would be called back in any second. No one called. Inside, I could still hear the faint murmur of conversation. A burst of laughter. Glasses clinking. Dinner continued. As if I had never been there. I walked down the steps slowly, careful with each one. The night air was colder than I expected, or maybe it just felt that way. I hadn't brought a coat. I hadn't thought I would need one. After all, I was home. Or at least, I thought I was. My car was still parked in the driveway, right where I had left it earlier that evening. I paused beside it, glancing back at the house. The windows were glowing warm with light. Shadows moved behind the curtains. For a moment, it looked exactly like it always had, alive, full, familiar. But something had shifted. Not in the house. In me. I opened the car door and sat inside, closing it gently. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but I didn't start the engine right away. For 10 days, I had been moving through that house like a guest who overstayed her welcome. After the funeral, everything changed. Not all at once. Not in a way you could point to and say, there. That's when it started. It was quieter than that. Colder. Romy stopped asking what I wanted for dinner. Wade stopped knocking before entering my room. Conversations would pause when I walked in, then continue in lower voices, as if I wasn't meant to hear. At first, I told myself it was grief. People handle loss differently. That's what I believed. But grief doesn't erase you from your own home. Grief doesn't make your presence feel inconvenient. I exhaled slowly and started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness as I backed out of the driveway. No one came to the door. No one watched me leave. The same house I had lived in for over 30 years disappeared behind me, shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was nothing more than a silhouette against the night. And for the first time since my husband died, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. I wasn't leaving. Home. Home had already left me. I didn't drive far that night. Just far enough to stop seeing the house in my rearview mirror. I pulled into a quiet parking lot near a closed grocery store and turned off the engine. The sudden silence pressed in around me, thick and unfamiliar. For a long time, I just sat there. Hands in my lap. Eyes on nothing. Trying to understand how a place I had spent over 3 decades building could feel so temporary in the end. The next morning, I went back. Not because I was welcome, but because everything I owned was still inside. I let myself in with my key. The same key I had carried for years, now feeling strangely heavy in my hand. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No breakfast dishes in the sink. No sound of the television. No footsteps upstairs. Just stillness. For a moment, I wondered if they had already left. If they had gone somewhere together, continuing their lives as if nothing had happened. As if I had already been erased. I walked into the living room first. That was when I noticed it. My photographs were gone. The frames were still there, on the mantel, on the side table, but the pictures inside them had been replaced. New photos. Smiling faces. Romy at the center. Wade beside her. Vacations I hadn't been part of. Moments I hadn't been invited to. I stepped closer, my fingers brushing the edge of one frame. 32 years of memories, reduced to empty glass. I didn't react. I just turned and walked upstairs. The hallway felt different. Not physically. But something in the air had changed. Like I was walking through a place that no longer recognized me. When I reached my bedroom, the door was open. That alone was strange. I always kept it closed. I stepped inside and stopped. Half of the closet was empty. My dresses, gone. My shoes, gone. Even the suitcase I had kept on the top shelf was missing. In their place were a few cardboard boxes, neatly stacked against the wall. I walked over and opened one. Inside were my things. Folded. Packed. Reduced. Not arranged with care. Organized for removal. That's when I saw it. An envelope. Placed on top of the second box, as if someone wanted to make sure I wouldn't miss it. My name was written on the front. Not the mom. Not even my first name. Just Myrtle. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. Cold. Practical. You have 2 weeks to vacate the property. No explanation. No conversation. Just a deadline. I stood there, the paper trembling slightly in my hand, and for the first time since the dinner, something became painfully clear. They hadn't just humiliated me. They had been planning this. For a long time. I didn't cry. Not when I read the letter. Not when I looked around the room that had once been mine. I simply folded the paper in half, then again, and placed it back on top of the box, exactly where I had found it. There was something about the neatness of it all that unsettled me more than anything else. Not anger. Not chaos. Just calculation. I sat down on the edge of the bed, our bed, and for a moment, my eyes drifted to the nightstand. His glasses were still there. Exactly where he had left them. A small, ordinary detail that somehow held more weight than the letter in my hand. Noel used to read every night before bed. Sometimes history books, sometimes old novels he'd already read twice. He'd underline sentences he liked, then read them out loud to me as if they were secrets worth sharing. "You should hear this, Myrtle," he'd say, adjusting those same glasses. I used to pretend to listen. Now, I would have given anything to hear his voice one more time. I reached out and picked them up, running my fingers along the frame. "They're trying to take the house," I whispered into the empty room. The word sounded strange out loud. Unreal. Because this house was never just a house. We built it together. Not from nothing, but close enough. 32 years of mortgage payments. Weekend repairs. Arguments over paint colors. Quiet mornings in the kitchen. Christmas lights that Noel insisted on putting up himself, even when his hand started to shake in later years. Every wall held something of us. And I remembered something then. A conversation we had years ago. Sitting right here, on this bed, late at night. "You don't have to worry about anything," Noel had said, his voice calm, certain. "Everything is taken care of. This house, everything we built, it stays with you." I had believed him. Not because of documents, but because of who he was. A man who kept his word. I placed his glasses back exactly where they belonged and stood up slowly. If Noel had said something, he meant it. Which meant one of two things. Either I had misunderstood everything about the life we built together, or someone was counting on me never asking questions. Downstairs, I could hear movement now. Voices. They were back. I glanced once more around the room, at the boxes, the empty closet, the life being quietly erased, and then walked toward the door. This time, I wasn't walking away. I was going to listen. I stopped halfway down the stairs when I heard my name. Not the mom. Not even a hesitant version of it. Just Myrtle. Romy's voice carried easily through the kitchen, smooth and controlled, like she was discussing something routine. She saw the boxes. Wade. There's no point pretending anymore. I stayed where I was, one hand resting lightly on the banister, my step silent against the wood. I know, Wade replied, his voice lower, strained. I just thought we'd have more time. Time. I almost smiled at that. 2 weeks. That was the time they had given me to pack up 32 years of my life. We've been over this, Romy said, a hint of impatience slipping through. The sooner she's out, the sooner we can move forward. Move forward. As if I were something holding them back. She's still my mother, Wade muttered. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough to make it clear that the thought had crossed his mind too late. And we've been more than fair, Romy replied. Most people wouldn't even give notice. The house is legally yours now. You have every right to decide what to do with it. Legally yours. My grip tightened slightly on the railing. So what? Wade said quietly, we just send her away. After everything? After everything. That was the closest he had come to saying it. To acknowledging that there had been a life before this moment. That's not what this is, Romy said quickly. We're helping her. She can move into one of those senior communities. Somewhere appropriate. Somewhere she'll be comfortable. Comfortable. In a place chosen for me. Away from everything I had built. And the house? Wade asked. I leaned forward just slightly, my breath held without realizing. It. Romy didn't hesitate. We'll renovate. Open up the downstairs, maybe add another bedroom. It's a great property, Wade. It would be a waste not to use it properly. Use it properly. I closed my eyes for a brief second. 32 years of memories. Reduced to square footage and renovation plans. There was a soft clink of glass, someone setting down a cup. You're overthinking this, Romy continued, her tone softening just enough to sound reasonable. She'll be fine. Honestly, Wade, she's been alone in that house for years anyway. Even when your father was alive. That wasn't true. But Wade didn't correct her. He didn't say anything at all. And in that silence, I heard the truth more clearly than any words. I stepped back from the stairs, careful not to make a sound. There was nothing left to misunderstand. Nothing left to hope for. They weren't reacting to grief. They weren't making a difficult decision. They were executing a plan. And I had just walked in on the part they never intended me to hear. I didn't go back downstairs. Not right away. Instead, I returned to the bedroom and closed the door quietly behind me, as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. I sat at the small desk by the window, the same place where I used to write grocery lists, birthday cards, little notes for Noel when he traveled for work. My hands rested on the surface for a moment. Still steady. That surprised me. Because something inside me had shifted. Not broken. Settled. They thought I didn't know. They thought I would read that letter, pack my things, and leave quietly, just like I had left the dinner table. Just like I had always kept the peace. I opened the drawer slowly. Inside, beneath old envelopes and a few unused stamps, was a small leather folder. Noel had given it to me years ago. Just in case, he had said. At the time, I hadn't asked what he meant. I hadn't needed to. I opened it now. Inside were documents. Not many. But enough. Insurance papers. Bank information. And at the very bottom, the copy of Noel's will. My name was there. Clear. Undeniable. Not just as his wife, but as the primary beneficiary. I read it once. Then again. Slower. More carefully. The house. The accounts. Everything we had built together. Left to me. Not Wade. Not anyone else. Me. I exhaled quietly, folding the document back into place. So Noel had kept his word. Which meant someone else had changed the story. Downstairs, I could still hear their voices, softer now, fading into the background like nothing important was happening. Like they had already won. I closed the folder and placed it gently back into the drawer. For years, I had avoided anything that sounded like conflict. I believed in patience. In understanding. In giving people the benefit of the doubt. But patience only works when there is respect on both sides. And understanding means nothing when the truth is being rewritten behind your back. I stood up and walked to the closet. Empty. Clean. Ready for someone else. I picked up one of the boxes and set it on the bed, opening it slowly. Folded clothes. Personal items. Pieces of a life reduced to categories. They had already done the work for me. All I had to do was leave. I closed the box again. No. That wasn't quite right. All they expected me to do was leave. I turned toward the door, my expression calm, my steps quiet. For the first time since the dinner, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was thinking. And somewhere, beneath the silence, beneath the grief, a plan was beginning to take shape. I didn't confront them. Not that day. Not the next one either. Instead, I did exactly what they expected me to do. I stayed quiet. I moved slowly through the house, careful not to interrupt their routine, careful not to give them any reason to think something had changed. Because on the surface, nothing had. Romy continued to speak to me the same way, short, polite, distant. Like I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome but hadn't yet taken the hint. Dinner's at 6, she said the next evening, not looking at me. Not with me. Just informing me. I nodded. Of course. Wade barely spoke at all. When he passed me in the hallway, there was always a pause. A flicker of something in his eyes, guilt, maybe. Or discomfort. But it never lasted long enough to become action. He would look away. Keep walking. And the moment would disappear like it never existed. I began packing. Not everything. Just enough to make it believable. A few sweaters. Some books. Personal items from the bathroom. I placed them carefully into the boxes they had prepared for me, as if I were cooperating, as if I had accepted their version of how this would end. Romy noticed. Of course she did. That's good, she said one afternoon, standing in the doorway of my room. It'll make things easier for everyone. Easier. I looked at her and offered a small smile. I wouldn't want to make things difficult. She smiled back. Relieved. That was the word for it. Relieved that I wasn't going to fight. Relieved that I was exactly who she thought I was. Someone quiet. Someone manageable. Someone who could be removed, without resistance. That night, I sat at the desk again, the leather folder open in front of me. I didn't rush. I read every page carefully. Every clause. Every name. Every date. There were things in those documents they hadn't counted on me understanding. Small details. But important ones. Enough to change everything. I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it. For years, I had trusted that love was enough to hold a family together. Now, I understood something else. Sometimes, it isn't love that decides how things end. It's paperwork. And patience. Downstairs, I could hear them laughing again. Comfortable. Certain. Planning a future that no longer included me. I let the sound settle into the background as I turned off the light and sat in the quiet. They thought I was leaving. They thought this was over. I didn't need to correct them. Not yet. Because the truth is, the more comfortable they became, the easier it would be to take everything back. The next morning, I left the house before anyone else was awake. Not in a hurry. Not in secret. Just quietly. The sky was still pale, the kind of early light that makes everything feel suspended, as if the world hasn't fully decided what the day will become. I had always liked that time of day. Noel used to call it honest hours. People show who they really are before the noise starts, he once told me. I think he was right. I drove to the bank first. The same branch Noel and I had used for years. The same building where we signed documents, opened accounts, made plans for a future we thought we understood. Inside, nothing had changed. The same marble floors. The same quiet voices. The same polite smiles. But this time, I wasn't there as someone's wife. I was there on my own. I'd like to review all accounts under my name, I said calmly at the desk. The young woman nodded and began typing. No hesitation. No confusion. Just confirmation. My name was still there. Active. Primary. I didn't react. I simply listened as she listed balances, account histories, access permissions. There were changes. Subtle ones. Recent ones. Names added. Access extended. But not everything had been transferred. Not everything had been taken. That was their first mistake. I'd also like to make some updates, I added. She looked up. Of course. I spent the next hour going through everything. Removing access. Securing accounts. Requesting copies of documents. Each step quiet. Methodical. No emotion. Just clarity. When I left the bank, the sun was higher. The world had fully woken up. People moved around me, busy with their lives, unaware that something had shifted in mine. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I made one more stop. A small office building on the corner of Maple and 3rd. The name on the door hadn't changed in years. Noel trusted him. That was enough for me. I stepped inside. The receptionist looked up, surprised but polite. I'd like to speak with Mr. Harlan, I said. She hesitated. Do you have an appointment? No, I replied softly. But he knew my husband. That was all it took. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from a man who had seen more family disputes than most people ever admit exist. He didn't ask many questions. He just listened. I placed the copy of the will on his desk. Then the letter they had given me. 2 weeks. Vacate the property. He read everything carefully, his expression unchanged. Then he looked up at me. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, folding his hands, did you sign anything recently? Anything transferring ownership? No, he nodded once. Slow. Certain. Then they may have a problem. I held his gaze. For the first time since the dinner, someone wasn't looking past me. They were looking at me. They think I'll leave, I said quietly. Mr. Harlan gave a small, knowing nod. They usually do. I stood up, smoothing my coat. Good, I replied. Because for the first time, I was no longer preparing to leave. I was preparing to stay. I returned to the house just before noon. Right on time. Not early. Not late. Exactly when they would expect me to be. Romy was in the kitchen when I walked in, standing by the counter with her phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. She glanced up briefly, then back down, as if my presence required no more attention than a passing shadow. You're back, she said. Not a question. Just acknowledgement. I had a few things to take care of, I replied, setting my purse down in its usual place. She nodded faintly, already losing interest. Trying not to move too slowly with the packing, she added, her tone light, almost casual. We'll be having people over this weekend. People? I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. I simply nodded. Of course. Upstairs, nothing had changed. The boxes were still there. The closet still half empty. The envelope still sitting where I had left it. It all looked the same. But it didn't feel the same. Because now, I knew exactly what I was looking at. Not a transition. Not a misunderstanding. A removal. I picked up another stack of clothes and folded them neatly into one of the boxes, continuing the quiet performance they expected from me. Compliant. Predictable. Gone soon. By late afternoon, the house began to shift. Voices. Movement. Doors opening and closing. They were preparing. I could hear Romy directing things downstairs, her tone sharper now, more energetic. Make sure the table is set properly. Move those chairs, we need more space. Wade, can you handle the wine? I paused for a moment, listening. Another dinner. Another gathering. But this one felt different. Larger. More deliberate. I walked downstairs slowly. No one stopped me. No one questioned why I was there. To them, I was already halfway out the door. The dining room had been rearranged. Extra chairs. New linens. Decorations that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a presentation. Romy turned when she saw me. For a brief second, something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe. Or annoyance. But it disappeared quickly. Oh, she said. You're still here. Still. I met her eyes, calm, steady. Yes, I said simply. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then smiled. Polite. Controlled. Well, try not to get in the way tonight, she said. It's important. Important. I nodded once. I understand. And I did. More than she realized. Because as I looked around the room, at the table, the glasses, the carefully arranged details, I recognized something familiar. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a moment they had planned. A moment where everything would move forward. Without me. I turned slightly, my eyes drifting across the space one last time. They thought this night would mark the beginning of their future. They were right. Just not in the way they expected. By the time the guests arrived, the house no longer felt like mine. Voices filled every corner. Laughter echoed off the walls. Glasses clinked, footsteps moved with purpose, and the air carried that familiar mix of perfume and expensive wine. It looked perfect. That's what Romy wanted. Perfect. I stood near the hallway for a moment, watching. No one greeted me. A few people glanced in my direction, their expressions polite but distant, the way you look at someone you don't quite recognize but assume belongs somewhere, just not near you. Wade moved through the room, shaking hands, smiling, playing his part. Confident. Comfortable. Like the man of the house. I waited until everyone had taken their seats before I stepped into the dining room. The same table. But not the same place. My usual chair had been moved. Not removed entirely. Just shifted. A few feet farther down. Slightly outside the center. A small detail. Easy to miss. Unless you knew exactly where you used to belong. I walked to it anyway and sat down. No one said anything. Not at first. Romy noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed. She set her glass down slowly, the sound light but deliberate. I thought we agreed, she said, her voice calm but carrying easily across the table, that you'd be more considerate tonight. The room quieted. Not completely. Just enough. Enough for everyone to listen. I folded my hands in my lap. I am, I replied. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. Then she smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. Just enough to make it look like she was still being reasonable. This isn't really your space anymore, she continued. We have guests. Important ones. Important. I nodded once. I can see that. For a moment, it almost seemed like she would let it go. Then she leaned back in her chair and said it again. Louder this time. Clearer. Security, she called, not taking her eyes off me. Let's not repeat the other night. Please remove her from the table. The word settled over the room like a slow, deliberate weight. No one moved right away. They were waiting. Waiting to see what I would do. Waiting for the same quiet exit. The same silence. The same version of me they had already decided I was. I looked around the table. At the guests. At Wade. He hesitated this time. Just for a second. Longer than before. But still not long enough. Still not enough to stop what was coming. The security men stepped forward again. Calm. Professional. Familiar. I placed my hands on the table and pushed my chair back slowly. Not rushed. Not embarrassed. Just precise. I won't be leaving, I said. My voice wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. It carried. The room stilled. Even Romy's expression shifted, just slightly. Confusion. Then irritation. I'm sorry, she said. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. Neatly. Carefully. Right in front of her. This house, I said, meeting her eyes, is still legally mine. Silence. Not polite silence. Not social silence. The kind that forces people to pay attention. Romy didn't touch the folder. Wade did. Slowly. He opened it. Read. Then read again. His face changed. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough for everyone to see. That's not possible, Romy said quickly, her voice sharper now. You assumed, I interrupted gently. No anger. No raised voice. Just clarity. I never signed anything, I continued. And according to the will, nothing was ever transferred to you. I let the words settle. No rush. No need. Because for the first time since that dinner, they weren't the ones in control of the room anymore. I was. No one spoke. Not immediately. The kind of silence that followed wasn't polite anymore. It was sharp. Uncomfortable. The kind that makes people shift in their seats and suddenly regret being in the room. Wade was still holding the papers. His eyes moved across the page again, slower this time, as if reading it differently might change what it said. It says your name, he muttered. Not to me. To himself. Romy let out a small, disbelieving laugh. That doesn't mean anything, she said quickly. People update wills all the time. We handled everything after the funeral. No, Wade interrupted, his voice quieter now. We didn't. That was the first crack. Small. But real. Romy turned to him, her composure tightening. What do you mean we didn't? You said, I assumed, he said, almost under his breath. The same word I had used. Assumed. I watched them, saying nothing. There was no need to rush. Truth has a way of unfolding on its own when given enough space. One of the guests cleared his throat softly. Another shifted his chair. The atmosphere in the room had changed completely. What was meant to be an evening of confidence and presentation had turned into something else entirely. Something exposed. Romy straightened in her seat, her voice firmer now, sharper. Even if that's true, she said, turning back to me, you can't just come in here and make a scene. This is still Wade's home. I met her gaze. No, I said calmly. It isn't. Another silence. Shorter this time. Heavier. The accounts, I continued, my tone steady, are also in my name. The access that was added recently has already been removed. Wade looked up at me then. Fully. For the first time. What do you mean removed? He asked. I mean, I said, you no longer have permission to make decisions about what isn't yours. No anger. No accusation. Just facts. Romy's expression changed then. Not confusion. Not irritation. Something deeper. Calculation. You went behind our backs, she said. I almost smiled. No, I replied softly. I finally looked in front of me. That landed. I could see it. Around the table, people were no longer pretending this was normal. They were watching now. Listening. Understanding that they had been invited into something far more real than a dinner party. Wade placed the papers down slowly. So what happens now? He asked. There was something in his voice. Not authority. Not certainty. Just uncertainty. I stood up from my seat, smoothing my sleeve lightly. What happens now, I said, is very simple. I looked at both of them. Then at the table. Then back at them. You finish your dinner. A pause. And tomorrow, I continued, we start correcting everything that should never have been changed in the first place. I picked up my bag. No rush. No tension. Just control. As I turned to leave the table, not being removed this time, but choosing to stand, I added one final thing. Quiet. Clear. And next time you invite people into this house, I glanced once more at Romy. Make sure you actually know who it belongs to. The house was quiet again the next morning. Not the heavy, hollow silence from before. Something different. Settled. I stood in the kitchen, the early light stretching across the floor, touching the edges of the table where everything had changed just hours ago. The same table. The same chairs. But the balance had shifted. Romy didn't come downstairs. Not while I was there. Wade did. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone entering a room they weren't sure they still belonged in. He stopped a few steps away from me, his hands empty this time. No glass. No distraction. Just him. Mom, he said. The word felt unfamiliar coming from him now. Not wrong. Just delayed. I turned slightly, acknowledging him, but I didn't fill the silence for him. He had to do that himself. I didn't know, he added. I studied his face for a moment. There was truth in it. But also something else. Convenience. I believe you, I said. And I did. That didn't change anything. He nodded, swallowing quietly. She thought, he started, then stopped. She assumed, I finished for him. He gave a small, almost defeated nod. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked around the kitchen. At the walls. At the small details he had grown up with but hadn't really seen in years. It doesn't feel the same, he said. No, I replied softly. It doesn't. Because a house can hold memories. But it can't protect them. That part depends on the people inside. He looked at me again, as if searching for something, permission, maybe. Or forgiveness. I didn't offer either. Not yet. Instead, I reached for my coat, folding it over my arm with quiet precision. I'll be meeting with the lawyer again this afternoon, I said. There are a few things that need to be formalized. He nodded. Of course. No argument. No resistance. Just acceptance. That was new. As I walked toward the door, I paused for a brief second, my hand resting on the frame. 32 years. Laughter. Arguments. Holidays. Ordinary mornings. All of it still there. But different now. Not broken. Just clearer. I turned back. Slightly, my voice calm. This house stays, I said. But what it means, that depends on what happens next. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because for the first time, he understood. I stepped outside. The morning air felt crisp, steady, real. Behind me, the house stood exactly where it always had. But I was no longer standing in it the same way. I wasn't being asked to leave. I wasn't being pushed aside. I had simply stepped back into my place. And this time, I knew exactly where I stood.